Hello, welcome to the Week in Review, your trusted weekly news review, where we go beyond the headlines to bring you in-depth analysis of some of the biggest stories making waves at home and abroad. I am Mamadou Mbodj, and as always, it's a pleasure to have you with us. Coming up today, demolition victims in Old Yindum appeal for government intervention after a controversial operation by the Department of Physical Planning. Amnesty International raises the alarm over a deepening global human rights crisis. And we mark Africa Vaccination Week and assess how the Gambia is faring in public health. Plus a major deal for rice farmers as the Roots Project partners with village associations for input support, and the University of the Gambia celebrates its 70th convocation with over 1,000 graduates now ready to take on the future. Also on our radar, a timely fact-checking and media literacy workshop by MAJAC, the Media Academy for Journalism and Communication, and its partners. Well, misinformation is really the plague, as it were, on our ecosystem, the media ecosystem. So we'll go into that. Now, helping me to unpack some of these stories and more is my colleague, journalist and news anchor, Julde Njai. A pleasure to welcome you to the program, Julde.
Thank you, Mr. Mbodj. It's always a pleasure to come to this program.
Good. Now, our first story takes us to Old Yindum, where residents affected by recent demolitions by the Department of Physical Planning are appealing for urgent government intervention. At a press briefing in Yarambamba, they voiced their frustrations and demanded justice. Let's just take a look and listen.
Physical planning, approval for that land.
The same physical planning gave us approval for this land. This is the sketch plan approved and stamped by physical planning and endorsed by the Chief of Combo North. If they truly wanted accurate information, they should have contacted us or responded to the court summons to give their side of the story.
That was Mr. Abdullah Jeng, Logistics Manager, SNJ Properties. A very serious claim there, isn't it really, Julie? Because they said that they had valid documents from the department. Then it makes me wonder, then how come you have this same department that gave you the valid documents, the license, if you like, to build, and yet the same department will come and demolish it? Where does accountability lie in such a case?
I mean, it's a problem over the years. We've seen a lot of demolition exercises being conducted by the Department of Physical Planning, and especially in Salaji and Sukuta and the surroundings. But of recent, we've seen demolition exercises, being done in Old Yindum, which is new. And a lot of these people are coming forward, with very serious allegations, because I read a story where one of them was saying that he invested, he had a company of $35 million, and he invested a lot of money to ensure that, he not only helped himself but also employ other young people in the country. So demolition exercises, I think this should be the last resort as far as some of, these things are concerned. I mean, I think government should really, especially the Department of Social Welfare, Physical Planning rather, should really, engage some of these people and then, come to a conclusion or an agreement sort of to be able to address some of these things. Because at the end of the day, the government or the department is claiming that these are reserve lands, but the residents there are saying that they have valid documents. I mean, and some of them are even saying that there is a court order in place that, clearly outline that Department of Physical Planning should not demolish their structures. But despite all of that, they still went ahead and then demolished it. And we've seen that demolition exercises have, caused more good than, you know, than harm than good. Because if, for instance, if someone is struggling to build for so many years and then you build your structure all of a sudden just to wake up one morning and then to be rendered homeless, I think that is there is another way to address these things than just demolishing these structures, because then you're putting people into pressure. You're increasing the number of displacements in your country. You're increasing poverty rate. You're, you know, increasing the dependency rate of your country, and I think it's not helpful. And you know, the worst thing, it enables trust erodes from, you know, between the people and the government, and that shouldn't be, because I mean, if the government is there and people trust the government to actually be there to protect their welfare and their well-being, is that if that same government is the one responsible to demolish some of their homes or houses, I mean, that is really crazy. And we've seen that in India. An incident happened there in 1992, the Mapri Masjid, which is a 16th century mosque, and it was demolished by the Hindus in India. And we've seen that, you know, that really caused a commotion between the Muslim and the Hindu community, and that led to the deaths of over 2,000 people. And we've seen that instances like that can really be crazy, and we don't pray that it reaches to that, but you know, government especially should be really tactical in the way they do things, especially when it comes to the homes of individuals. I mean, it can be, because these are emotions. People are connected to these homes. They invested, they spend their time, money, energy, and everything in this thing. So I think, you know, they should really do something rather than demolition. I think demolition should be the last thing.
I think that land is really one of the biggest sources of communal tension, perhaps around the world. But for instance, what was claimed there by Mr. Jeng, this thing must be investigated.
Right.
Well, what happened? How did they get that valid document from Department of Physical Planning, a valid document? How did they get it? What happened?
Absolutely. I mean, I think that is key. It's one way of unearthing corruption, because I want to believe that there is foul play here, because if these people are claiming that they have valid documentation to say that this home really belongs to them, and the same physical planning that they are alleging that, you know, are the ones that give them this, I mean, there is a foul play. It needs to be investigated, and as soon as possible by the authorities, to clear some of these confusion, because we don't want to have a case where you have communal violence and all of that in the country because of land. And we've seen that over the years. We have been having a lot of land disputes, you know, between family members, alcalos, communities, the grassroots level. We've been having a lot of that, you know, in order to actually diffuse the tension. I think there needs to be an investigation to be done in order for accountability as well, because we can't really keep people having their homes demolished, and then at the end of the day we are having two sides of the story. Government should set up an independent committee or of experts to actually look into this thoroughly and then come up with a report for us to find a lasting solution to this.
That's it. But whilst you were talking there, I thought we've had a few episodes, as it were, of this sort of thing in the past, but I'm not sure whether we've ever had anything as an investigation into what actually happened, because all the people as well in the past have alleged that they got the document, the valid document from the Department of Physical Planning, which came afterwards and demolished them and said they were illegally constructed.
I mean, it's a concern, and I think government should really take this seriously. Before it was Salaji, Sukota, and now it's all, you know, who knows what it's going to be next, who is going to fall victim next. So I think it is the utmost responsibility of the government to actually investigate this, come up with a report so that we can settle this land dispute once and for all.
Thank you very much, Julia. We go to our next story. Amnesty International has released its latest report, the State of the World's Human Rights Report, which paints a grim picture of rising rights abuses worldwide. Let's just take a look and listen.
The report raises serious concerns over the increasing risk faced by individuals engaging in peaceful protest. Across numerous countries, demonstrations have been met with excessive and often lethal force. Amnesty documents widespread violations of the rights to freedom of expression, peaceful assembly and association.
Yes, Julia, the report really raises so many issues, doesn't it? Conflict, group repression, economic hardship. I wonder which of these really would you say sort of pose the greatest threat to us here, if one can put it that way, or even the whole continent. And it was quite interesting as well how they connected certain economic situations, as it were, to human rights abuse. You know, rising cost of living, people don't have much to eat and the like. And seeing that now it's like human rights abuse, isn't it?
Absolutely. I mean, we have seen a lot of conflicts going on in Africa, not just Africa, but around the world. And we've seen the number of displacements that is happening. We've seen the number of rape cases, we've seen the number of assault on children and women around the world. And for instance, if you take a look at what is really happening in Sudan between the army and the rapid support forces in Sudan, around 12,000 people are reported to have died in 2023, civilians. I mean, that is huge. 12,000 people dead and over 8 million people are reported to have been displaced, and these people, majority of them are women and children. So if you look at the proportion, if you look at the figure, it's really alarming. And not just that, look at for instance, the issue of Palestine, look at the issue of Myanmar, look at the issue of Gaza, look at the issue of Israel, Palestine, the issue of Iran, Iraq. You know, a lot of displacements, a lot of human rights violations, you know, that are meted on some of these innocent women and children. So, I mean, these things need some concerted efforts by global leaders to actually come together to find a lasting solution to this. Whilst these wars are going, women and children are suffering.
Absolutely. So coming closer home, we are not in a conflict situation at all.
Right.
And the kind of human rights violations we're talking about, we don't have them here anymore. Thank God for that. So but still we cannot be complacent.
We cannot.
You know what I mean?
Right.
The enabling conditions, one must look at what are the enabling conditions of these things. And the fact that they've talked about economic hardship, and all over the place, everywhere they're suffering cost of living crisis. So there is some management we need to do here so that we can stave off, as it were, that kind of behavior as much as possible, isn't it?
Right. I mean, I totally agree with you, because if you look at the current percentage of youth unemployment in the country, we have 31.6% of young people who are unemployed in country. So that can really trigger a lot of things. And if you look at the when it comes to those young people who are not into neither education, skills set, or those that are not working, you have the figure rose from 50 to 62.8% in 2023. These are people who are not in the formal sector, they are in the informal sector. And we know that in the Gambia, the informal sector, it's not regulated. You know, they don't have protection, they don't have social protection measures, and a lot is going on. You've seen also the number of bagway people, young people that are embarking on this bagway. I mean, all this pressure could really trigger a lot of things. And some people can even attribute this to high crime rate. I mean, unemployment, human rights violations, can go a long way towards, having a trickle effect on all of these sectors. On employment, you have crime rate, you have all of this inflation, it causes all of that. So as a country, I think that we need concerted effort to be able to work towards ending this, to address this. I know to some extent government is really doing well, especially now with the introduction of TVET, and all of that at the Ministry of Youth and Sports as well. They've been doing a lot of initiatives to ensure that they support young people to start up businesses.
Absolutely. But Hugh, why do you think in situations like this, we tend to think that maybe regional and international bodies, as it were, can help in sort of being a pressure, political pressure, diplomatic pressure, that all matters, so that, we can move away, as it were, from these retarding some of these behaviors, they retard a society
yeah.
from this retarding, as it were, path we are on. It seems they're quite weak. Their control on the national, what's happening within the national borders seem to be very weak.
It is. I mean, I think there is, to some extent, the lack of will from the government to actually get these things done. If you look at it now, for instance, the issue of Burkina Faso, what is happening, you know, he is having support from all over the world, you know, because of how firm he is in taking some of these matters. You have the onion sector now in Burkina Faso. Now they've stopped exportation of onions and even importation of onions in the country to boost local production. We've seen that just recently, the Ibrahim laid a foundation to actually have enabled poor people in Burkina Faso to have access to homes, all that gear towards ensuring that they limit the homeless, the number of homeless people in Burkina Faso. I mean, it's just a matter of political will.
But isn't it, that is one aspect, but again, the human rights report, they pointed out in Burkina Faso, the human rights abuse is shocking.
Shocking.
So there's also that
even
aspect.
Journalists,
so
even with journalists as well. So for me, I really think that some of these things, it's a matter of commitment to be ready to do it. I mean, the instruments are already there. The regulatory frameworks are already in place. In the Gambia here, we have ratified all of these international legal instruments and documents that are in place. But the political will actually to get things done is actually where we are having a problem. So.
That's it. And aren't we in trouble here? I'm spending a bit more time because it's really very important right now around the world. There's something they're calling the Trump effect.
Right.
See, this report actually says that these problems are really on the rise. And the Trump effect, where he would embolden repressive regimes to do whatever. So in many ways, we are really in trouble to some extent, or human rights is really in trouble to some extent, because here when we talk about some of the economic gains, for instance, in Burkina Faso, what they're doing. But again, it's horrible. It's quite grim, you know, for the opponents or dissidents, what they're doing to them. It's quite shocking. So when you're faced with this mixed picture, what do you judge? How do you judge? It's so tempting to say that, yes, we would rather take that than the human rights. You do hear people say that, and even they dismiss democracy and liberalism and say, look, bring me economic development. I don't care about that. Especially with the examples of China now. It's a very grim, the prospects are quite grim.
Absolutely. They're not. I mean, and people should not mistake in this. I mean, economic rights are human rights as well, because, for instance, if you give me food to eat, food on the table, and every day you're assaulting me, I don't have freedom of expression or speech, or I don't have freedom to have my own voice heard. I mean, in some extent, in a way, you're really caging me. You're putting me in a cage, and that is really, really dangerous. And that is what we are seeing right now, you know, in countries all over the world trying to suppress media freedom, freedom of expression, and, you know, that of the media. And we've seen that even Burkina Faso, that we just have the example we gave of Burkina Faso recently. They're doing well when it comes to the economic, but the human rights violations as well, especially with the arrest of journalists and all of that, they are not quite doing well in that area.
That's the other part we're talking about here, the shrinking civic space. Journalists and protests. In fact, during the week, a court in Kenya ruled that the government ban on protests last year was illegal. So that shrinking space as well, civil society, journalists and the like, that is worrying. We don't quite have it here yet, but as I said earlier, we must never be complacent about these things. They just creep on you. So one must be constantly vigilant.
Absolutely. I think the role of the journalist right now is so critical for the fact that, I mean, we are in the era of misinformation, disinformation, fake news, and all of that. I mean, journalists, this is a very critical moment for journalists and those in the civil society as well, you know, to not just put the government to check and hold them accountable, but also to be to ensure that anything that they are really bringing out to the public, it is something that is accurate, it is balanced, it is fair and impartial as well, in order to really survive.
Thank you very much there, Julia. Now to our next story. An international gathering was underway in this country aiming to strengthen efforts for reparative justice for Africans and people of African descent. Let's just take a look and listen.
In Africa is deteriorating in alarming rates. Civic space is shrinking. Freedom of expression is under siege. Many activists and journalists face harassment, intimidation, and even violence for voicing their opinion.
The embers of destruction still glow in Cabo Delgado, northern Mozambique, and unresolved election disputes remain peppered about the continent, causing tension and a potential for more coups d'etats, deepened militarized politics.
Jules, there are two stories, the previous story and this one segues into that perfectly, because here really the focus afterwards was on reparations there. So, and those were Naji Mule Larson, a member of the steering committee of the NGOs Forum, and Jagan Gray Johnson, a member of the Open Society Foundation. So, we've been talking about reparations for a while now, haven't we? But the people who have the money, the people who did the damage, they're reluctant, especially in the world we are in now. What chance for reparations now in the world?
I mean, not just the world. Let us come closer back home in the Gambia, for instance.
No, because this was talking about in the context of people of black descent.
Yeah, that
is the black people around like slavery. So we're really going back directly. That's the direct line.
Absolutely.
But there are implications for other reparatory
things. I mean, it's obvious, because if you look at that now, more than ever, the African, especially Africans, African Union, ECOWAS, and to some extent, are really calling on for the acknowledgement of a lasting, impact as far as colonialism is concerned, as far as slavery is concerned. I mean, we've seen that still there is modern day slavery. We've seen modern slavery, which is really alarming, for an African country to really encounter such in the 21st century. We've seen that figures, according to statistics, Nigeria had the highest number of people living in modern day slavery. Like the number is around 1.6 million people in Nigeria. In Mauritania, Ethiopia, Egypt, all these countries are actually reported to have been living with serious modern day slavery. I mean, it's extraordinary to see that a lot of these things are happening in the 21st century. I mean, it's alarming. And like I always say, it's just the political will. I know that Nigeria, for instance, is dealing with a lot of these Boko Harams, is dealing with jihadism and all of that to some extent, and also Sudan and all of that. They all of them are actually dealing with it. But it's a problem. I mean, it shouldn't be happening. Reparations should be done. Justice ought to be seen to be done. But again, not just putting the figures out there, but also ensuring that, accountability measures are put in place. What are some of these accountability measures? It's one thing to be having forums year in, year out, giving out big figures, but also it's another for these governments in these countries to be committed towards reparations, to be committed towards lasting peace, to be committed towards justice, and then reparations, because justice delayed is justice denied. And for far too long, we're seeing these countries really battling with modern day slavery, and it ought not to be.
But this is it, Julie. All of it now, especially when we put it in the context of current geopolitics, it might sound like it's a whistle in the wind, you know what I mean? So these ideas, this liberal, as it were, ideas, humanitarian ideas, these are the very ideas today that are on the retreat. This is really what the point is. Because one is thinking about here, what practical pathways are there that we can tread to really address this aspect. And when we put it in the context, you're talking about reparations, then I thought we better have a huge reparations fund because now human rights abuses are going up. You know what I mean?
Absolutely.
So it's a curious, interesting mix tapestry we have here, isn't it?
It is,
So
it
what
is.
chance for reparations? I mean, how should we do it? Or should we try to focus on other things? I don't know, development. I don't know.
We can't really move on fully as a continent, as countries, without having to, you know, address some of these critical issues like human rights violations, systematic racism, you have modern day slavery. Some of these things ought to be taken care of, because we can't really heal as a people if some of these things are not addressed. And I think it's possible. This is not impossible. There should be that political will, and it is possible. And it's not just one government cannot do it alone. It needs concerted effort. It needs collaboration between governments in Africa or West Africa, let's say. We have a regional bloc, ECOWAS. I mean, it's not impossible to do some of these things. But again, whether that is the priority for these governments it's another thing, whether they are also ready to take these things seriously. Like I said, it's not a matter of coming with big figures every year telling us that these are the statistics, but after the statistics, what are you doing about them to address some of these things, to avoid us having every year in year out statistics upon statistics.
Interesting you should say there that we cannot move on without reparations,
Right.
to which I thought, oh my God, humanity has always moved on. All these ideas about reparations are very new. So many people have had to swallow or whatever there was. But reparations here, there are many forms of reparations. They're not
Right.
simply just financial.
Financial.
There are other things that one
Absolutely.
can address these things.
Right.
Because reparations directly linked to what? Restorative, isn't it?
Right.
The financial bit, obviously, one understands that.
Yeah.
But there are other aspects that perhaps we can do something about.
We can. That is why, I mean, for me, we can't move on as a people, as a continent, without reparations. And like you rightly mentioned, it's not all about monetary, you know, reparations. We're talking about something very deep. We have to heal the wounds that are there. We have to bridge, really bring back the trust, the love that we have for one another. We really need to understand ourselves and our mission and vision, really, because our founding fathers really, some of the things that they have, the vision they have for Africa, it's dying down slowly, and it's rather unfortunate. And I think there is a chance for that to come back through reparations. There is chance for that to come back through justice and accountability.
Some people call that post-optimism. Now to our next story. During the week, the Gambia joined the rest of Africa to commemorate Africa Vaccination Week. Let's just take a look at this clip and listen.
The story I have just highlighted captures the essence of this year's Africa Vaccination Week theme. Immunization for all is humanly possible. It is a message that deeply resonates in the Gambia, where even with limited resources, we continue to reach farther, work harder, and protect more children through the power of vaccines, or as I've been educated.
That was Dr. Nathan Machaita, WHO representative in this country. Immunization for all is
It's humanly possible.
To which I ask, why? What is preventing us from achieving it? It is humanly possible, you know what I mean?
It's
So
humanly
what is-
possible.
Granted,
It is.
but what's been preventing us from achieving it, if it is so possible?
It requires a lot of things, because vaccines are expensive, one. Two, it needs a lot of expertise to actually to be able to get some of these things, to get them tested, to be sure that they can be used. You know, it's a long process. But again, the biggest challenge that is facing the African WHO Africa region, I think it has to do with funding. You know, the governments, are they ready to pump that much huge money to ensure that they have vaccines or to be able to immunize people? And we've seen that that has been a challenge over the years, but thankfully recently we've seen that a lot of collaboration, there is collaboration between these governments, WHO, UNICEF, and other governments as well, especially during the COVID-19 pandemic. We've seen that African countries coming together, collaborating, you know, in order to you know, come up with even vaccines. So it's not impossible. The word impossible does not even exist. If you are ready and committed, it can always be possible. But again, it's alarming to know that despite all the efforts that have been done, there is still a huge gap towards achieving the immunization agenda of 2030, because right now as we speak, in 2023, the WHO Africa region reported that 56.6% of children receive full immunization, and 35.1% partial immunization, and 8.4% no vaccination at all in the African region. That's staggering statistics there.
Absolutely, but something equally scary to some extent is what we have here, because in the Gambia historically we've had high performance in childhood immunization, but we've been in decline.
Yeah.
I've seen certain statistics where in 2012, for instance, you had 90% or so, 99% or so immunization. Today you'll get 80. So there is a certain decline. That is what we need to address in this country, isn't it?
Right. I mean, especially now with COVID-19, I mean, that has really, post-COVID, has really taken a lot of these public health measures, you know, backward to some extent, because of a lot of some of these claims that, you know, COVID vaccines are harmful. They can do this. If you are vaccinated, you can have diseases and all of that. So that trust to some extent has really eroded post-COVID, and, you know, public health officials are really finding it very difficult to get people on track. And again, with the advent of, you know, technology and all of that, social media, you are seeing all sorts of theories when it comes to vaccines and immunization. So I mean, it will take a lot of advocacy, it will take a lot of awareness creation in order for Gambia to be back on track again. Not just Gambia, but to some extent I want to believe the WHO Africa region, because these figures are really alarming if you ask me. I mean, but again, it needs stakeholder engagement. People need to be ongoing. The campaign needs to, you know, go not every year when we have that is when we come up, gather together, make big speeches, and that's just the end of it. No, my grandmother or my grandfather in the village won't understand these big speeches or the meaning of, you know, some of these statistics really. So I think it's important to break it down to the people to really understand that vaccines are very, very important. It's not just for short term, but it has a long-term effects that if you don't get your child vaccinated, it can go a long way towards affecting that child. And we have now seen that a lot of diseases are coming, new diseases are coming. So I mean,
it's not simply your child, the community
as well. Absolutely, that's the thing about vaccination. And we've seen that, especially last week we did a story about diarrhea and how it is resistant to antibiotics and all of that. So that if you don't vaccinate your child, some of these things can really affect them. Their muscles, their immune system can be weak, and we know children. So I mean, it's important to actually vaccinate kids, not just kids, but adults as well. But I think it should start with the kids. It's very important.
Thank you very much there, Julie. Now to our next story, our midpoint. In a major boost for Gambian agriculture, the Ministry of Agriculture's Roots Project has signed a new agreement with 35 village associations under the wet season rice input support program. Let's just take a look and listen.
In a bid to foster ownership and sustainability, the program is based on a partial and declining subsidy mechanism over a 3-year period. This means in the first year, the Roots project will offset 80% of the cost, 50% in the second year, and 20% in the third and final year.
The other thing I wanted to say about the Rice Input Support Program is it extends the support and benefits across the country and not just concentrated in certain areas.
We heard there from Dr. Demba Sahabali, the Minister of Agriculture, and Mahmoud Ali Jain, the project coordinator of Roots. Julie, my first thought was that I wonder how significant is this program in tackling food security in this country, reducing our reliance on rice. What do you make of the Roots program?
I mean, the Roots project has really benefited a lot of smallholder farmers, and it has also provided a lot of seedlings to some of these farmers, and it really has done a lot of capacity building trainings for local farmers, those that are doing smallholder farming and all of that. And we've seen that in 2023 the project was able to support some 2,534 farmers, about hectares of rice cultivation, and that's a lot. And we know that the staple food in the country here is rice, so venturing in this field will go a long way towards ensuring that we have full rice sufficiency, but also ensuring that we reduce the dependency on imports and exportation rather. And we've seen that also Gambia is hugely depends largely on exportation. We don't really import, exactly. Right? We don't really produce a lot of things here, but the Roots project was able to some extent bridge that gap. But again, we have a long way to go. This is a project and it will phase out, but after the phasing out of the project, what is next? Some of maybe 2,000, 3,000 farmers have benefited, but out of 2-point-something million people in the country.
But you see, the idea is that part of the long-term goals of this project is to empower these farmers to manage it
absolutely
afterwards. So one wonders what conditions must be in place for that sort of thing to happen. How realistic would it be? Because if you want the sustainability in the longer term, these things must be in place.
Absolutely. I mean, it requires a lot of fund and when the funds are not there, even though they have the expertise because they've been trained on some of these things, but if the funding it's not there, I mean, it's practically impossible for them to continue on with these initiatives. I think then it is the responsibility of the government again to ensure that some of these initiatives are sustainable by ensuring that they invest heavily on local farmers to train them, but not just that, provide them with the necessary equipment, seeds, the right seeds to be able to do some of these things. I mean, for instance, but we can't have everyone depending on one person, for instance, and it's not an issue of decentralization. For instance, in the Combos, for instance, we don't have that much land where people can cultivate rice at a very large extent. But again, in rural Gambia, for instance, the Jahali Pacha rice field is there. I mean, that is one of the areas that they can really leverage on to ensure that these initiatives are sustainable. And it's not impossible. Trust me, we can do it. We've been doing it during Jawara time and all of that. Our importation is minimal and all of that, but now we've seen that we are doing a lot of that. It's not impossible. It's just a matter of sustainability, commitment, and the willingness to actually do it.
Thank you very much there, Julie Jai. This is the halfway point. We'll take a short break.
Money has just made money transfer easier. Now you can send money from Gambia to Senegal directly from your Q Money wallet. So what are you waiting for? Get your Q Money account now and start sending money to your friends and families through Orange Money in Senegal now. For more information, call our customer care on 133. Q Money, Sunu Kalpe. Terms and conditions apply.
Welcome back to the Week in Review. If you're just joining us, you've missed 5 stories, but don't worry, we have 5 more to go. To this story, a timely and important initiative, the Sub-Saharan African Women's Empowerment and Demographic Dividend Plus, better known as SWED Plus Gambia, have wrapped up a 3-day training for 40 journalists focusing on ethical and sensitive reporting on sexual and gender-based violence. Let's just take a look and listen.
So one of the project objectives is to strengthen adolescent girls and young women's empowerment, which is to improve the demographic transition and reduce gender inequality. And one of the priority areas is provision training of gender-based violence, sexual exploitation and abuse, and sexual harassment. On the subcomponent 1.5, which is to improve prevention and response to gender-based violence, sexual exploitation and abuse, and sexual harassment.
There we had Fabian in a Grand Sanya. She is the GBV focal person for SWED Plus Gambia. So Julie, what would you say that is really the important thing that journalists must be trained in reporting these things. How significant is that?
It is very, very significant. I mean, I cannot emphasize the importance of ethical journalism, especially in this era of this social media or digital media era. I mean, it's very, very important. Journalists ought to know, in as much as it is important to get the news, and we are always in haste to actually break the news, but it's one thing to break the news, but it's another to ensure that you factor tick all these very important elements and principles of journalism, which are the ethical considerations. I mean, for instance, when you're dealing with gender-based violence, sexual assault, sexual harassment, I mean, these are very, very sensitive matters. You ought to be careful as to how to really report them. You can't just focus on, okay, because I need this to come out, and then you bring it up. But how are you protecting those that are affected, the victims or the survivors? How are you ensuring that the story that you are bringing out does not have a long-term effect or impact or consequences on the person that you are reporting on? So I think these are some of the things that are very, very critical. I know now when an incident happened, for instance, everyone rushed to social media, and we've seen instances where a husband beats the wife or butchered the wife in the leg, and we've seen the pictures all over social media. We've seen journalists also to some extent carrying the same images on social media, reporting them directly to their different platforms. I think some of these things really journalists should be really careful of. We have citizen journalists, but journalists are people who are trained, they are professionals, so they ought to know better. I think this training is really apt, especially in an era of where we have been witnessing an increase in gender-based violence, sexual abuse, sexual assault, and all of that. Journalists really needs training, especially about ethical issues.
Thank you very much, Julie. To our next story. During the week, the University of the Gambia held its 17th convocation at Faraba campus. Over 1,000 students graduated. Now let's just take a look and listen.
Figures into the world of work merely as moral boosters. Rather, with them proudly discharge your much expected responsibility of innovating, creating, and leading. The challenges of unemployment and migration are truly daunting, but your potential is limitless and able to transform any challenge into an opening for success. And
a degree is not a moral booster. Quite interesting there.
Right.
And that's exactly it. Now that you go into the world and show us what you've learned.
Yeah.
Demonstrate.
Right.
What you've learned. A very significant milestone in a person's life. Really.
Yeah, it is. I mean, I think this is a proud moment for everyone, and I just want to take this opportunity to congratulate everyone that made it out there. It's not really an easy journey to graduate. I am at the university, and I know it takes a whole lot to really get that degree. But again, as a country, we ought to, these are the moments that we should really take the opportunity to reflect on some of our achievements, but also our challenges, to be able and map a way forward. I think that is very, very important, in as much as the Ministry of Higher Education has been doing a lot of things, coming up with schools at Faraba Banta, and also ensuring that there is a focus on the USET field. It's up, but again, it's one thing to graduate, but it's another to also be, important or valuable in the job market. And that is what we've been seeing over the years. We have a lot of thousands graduate, but again, when it comes to the job market, only few can deliver. So I think this is something that we should really look at. Where is the problem coming from? Let us also address it as a country. But let us not just focus on the quantity, but quality education. I think that is important.
That's it. And the hard skills, you've got the degree as a lawyer, accountant, administrator, you know how to do.
Right.
But you also have the soft skills.
Nice.
Well, how do I contribute to society? That dimension. This is why so many people with your degree, you have a job outside, you will leave. So it's very difficult. When you leave, you will send money. There's no denying that. Yeah. Yet they contribute to build its capacity. Yeah. So it's a very difficult one. It's not as easy as that.
It is. I mean, for instance, if you look at Gambia's market, it's small. We have a very small market, and a lot of people wants to, and especially young people wants to venture into office job. They don't want to be carpenters, they don't want to be in the construction industry and all of that. So, but I think it's important. These are the things. Now, our educational system, our curriculum, is it tailor-made to ensuring that when graduates come out, they have the mindset of being entrepreneurs, of building their own empires, or they just want to seek for jobs to work for other people? I think that is also a critical conversation that we should have as a country, as a nation, to actually reflect on some of these things. Are we really building our people to be critical, to stand on their own, or do we have still this colonial mindset of, okay, telling you how to do everything and then working in the office is just one of the way to be really successful?
Well, at least one thing we can say is that it's a good thing every year that we are producing many graduates.
In their thousands.
So we'll see what happens. The future will take care of itself, I suppose. Thank you very much there, Julie. And we'll go on to our next story. During something significant development, really, in the Gambia's media regulatory landscape. The Vice President officially commissioned a brand new state-of-the-art, they call it, Broadcasting Content Monitoring Center for Pura. Now let's just listen to this clip on watch.
The commissioning of this broadcasting monitoring system today is not just cutting a ribbon. On the contrary, we are opening a gateway to greater regulatory excellence, greater accountability, and greater service to the Gambian people.
That was Dr. Njoguba, Director General of Pura. Commissioning, opening, this is not simply cutting a ribbon. Very interesting there.
Right.
So, how significant is that really in the media regulatory landscape? Yeah.
I think it's important for Pura as a body, a regulatory body, to actually be able to have systems in place that will independently help monitor some of these utility and service providers that we have in the country, because a lot of things are coming. 2 weeks ago, we have stakeholders from the GCCPC, Consumer Competition and Protection Commission, and you know, they conducted a study, and we've seen that a lot of these irregularities are happening in the utility and telecommunications industry. For instance, we have cases of data fraud. We are seeing that happening in the Gambia. We are seeing interruption in services. We are seeing a lot of, unfair competition happening around, in the country. So it's important for Pura to really increase or equip its system, boost its system to be able to handle some of these things, to be able to be fair to the consumers as well, because we know that consumer protection is key, and they are really at the right direction to ensure that consumer protection, welfare, it's at the core of what they do.
That's it. But some people will say that, yes, regulation can enhance accountability,
right,
but they worry about other things, for instance, censorship.
Yeah, especially in the media industry. I mean, if you if you regulate it to some extent, you tend to censor media houses. And there is this even debate of whether media houses should really censor themselves, or they have government to come and then censor them. We've seen that that is really a threat as far as freedom of expression and that of the press is concerned.
That's a debate in it. That's a debate in itself. Let's move on to the next story. Thank you very much. Julie. Now to our next story. During the week, the Gambia joined the rest of the world to mark International Labour Day. Here, let's just take a look and listen.
It's a great day whereby workers should make projections relating to their terms and conditions of employment, their living conditions, their health, and etc., and give it to government for government to take appropriate actions in giving solutions to their problem.
Taking appropriate actions to get the right solutions. That was Mr. Ibrahima Garbacham, who is the Secretary General of the Gambia Trade Union Congress. So, this year's theme, what is it? They call it Safety and Health in the Workplace. That is one area we are always complaining about.
Yeah.
But what one wonders, what effect, you know, marking these occasions, going for a march past, talking about it, but the appropriate action that you need to turn it into reality, often that's where we fall short.
Absolutely. I mean, just I did mention the figures, the latest GBOS figures when it comes to unemployment, but again, those that are huge chunk of people working are in the informal sector, and we know that there has not been regulation as far as the informal sector is concerned in the Gambia. So that is a problem. For instance, if a country have 62.8% of its population working in the informal sector, and that sector it's not regulated, then there is a problem. Okay, but even the regulated one, for instance, those that are working in the formal sector, for instance, how many people there that are having their contracts, how many people are having their wages or they are paid as they should be, how many people there that are working overtime are being paid overtime, how many people there have social security, you know, with and all of these things, so that after pension, when pension, they can have their social security fund and all of that. But a lot of these people are working without having all of these things, either contract or social security being paid, and all of these things. So that's a challenge. That in itself, it's a threat to workers working, and I think it is a collaboration between government and the private sector, in as much as private sector is very, very important in any economy. But again, they should work in collaboration with the government to regularize some of these things. You know, when the law says this, let all of us work towards that. But you can't have people just regulate just the government or those that are in government and leaving those that are working in the private sector. I mean, it ought to be regulated. I am of the belief that that sector really ought to be regulated, and it needs all of us to come together to actually really map out or table some of these things out, and then see how best we can really come up with regulatory frameworks to address them.
And enforce.
Yes.
Enforcement.
Yes.
That is always the trick.
We've mentioned this over and over and over again.
So we wouldn't bore our viewers with that anymore. We go to our final story. During the week, Majak, the Media Academy for Journalism and Communication, held a 3-day fact-checking and media literacy workshop for 30 journalists. Let's just take a look and listen.
Please. With strong commitment, together, fact-checkers and community media can nurture trust in the information ecosystem of our respective country.
It is only through the free exchange of accurate information that citizens can meaningfully participate in the democratic process, holding leaders accountable and building a society founded on trust and transparency.
Building a society founded on trust and transparency. And we had there Michelle Kenmore, who is the advisor and information officer of the UNESCO West Africa, and Naomi Williams, Deputy Permanent Secretary, Minister of Information. What did you make of that? Our elections, we're having elections next year. So now misinformation, now it seems we're going to have to live with these little terrible creatures we call misinformation and disinformation and all the rest.
And the good thing is that we have organizations that are institutions that are willing and working to ensure that they feed the public the right information. Even those politicians, we know them, as we know that some of them are fond of really misinforming people, some of them deliberately, because we've seen a lot of fact checks happening. People say stuff that is not accurate, and then journalists will either fact check, or you have fact check institutions to actually fact check some of this information and give people the accurate figure. And like you mentioned, we are coming to a very critical phase, you know, in our country. That is the electoral cycle, and that is where you see a lot of misinformation. You know, a lot of people coming up with claims that they cannot justify. So this is a very important moment for journalists, and I think more training should be done of this nature for journalists to be able to know some of the tools that they can use, because they are readily available. We are in a digital world. All these tools are there, but it just takes for journalists to be trained to know how to apply them.
That's it. We're told we're done now. Of course, the problems that journalists have these days is that social media in its entirety has been conflated with journalism. And the like, but that's a huge debate in itself, isn't it? we'll have a program. We need to have a program on that. Thank you very much, Julian Jai, for your wonderful insights, and thank you, viewers. Until next time, we apologize for not having the sign language interpreted today. Until next time, goodbye.